Okay, there's a little bit of a continuity arrow here. My hair's up. Uh, I ran out of space on my iPad, so I had to clear some up. Anyway, and after boasting this way of tolerance, I had come to the admission that it has its limit. Contact may be founded on the hard rock or wet marshes, but after a certain point, I don't care what it's founded on. When I came back from the East last autumn, I felt that I wanted the world to be in uniform and sort of a moral attention forever. I wanted no more riotous excursions with privileged glimpses into the human heart. So this is written or occurs just after World War One, and of course the military has a very rigid set of rules and regulations. And our narrator, who happens to be um, Nick Carraway, drew a blank on his name there for a second. Nick Carraway is he doesn't really know how to fit back into the world after being at war, which is actually a common problem for people who are in war. Only Gatsby, the man who gives his name to this book, was exempt from my reaction. Gatsby, who represented everything for which I had unaffected scorn. If personality is an unbroken series of successful gestures, then there is something gorgeous about him, something heightened sensitivity to the promises of life, as if he were related to one of those intricate machines that register earthquakes 10,000 miles away. This responsiveness had nothing to do with that flabby impressionability which is dignified under the name of creative temperament. It was an extraordinary gift for hope, a romantic readiness such as I had never found in any other person, and which is not likely I shall ever find again. So Nick, our narrator, which he hasn't named himself yet, but Nick is extremely fond of Gatsby. And you'll find that throughout the book that he doesn't really think that Gatsby can do any wrong, at least for a while. No, Gatsby turned out all right in the end, and it is what preyed on Gatsby, what foul dust floated on the wake of his dreams, that temporarily closed out my interest in the abortive sorrows and such short-winded elations of men. So Nick was infatuated with Gatsby, not necessarily romantically, but he really, really looked up to Gatsby and thought he was the best thing that ever happened. And he's saying, foreshadowing, bad things happened to Gatsby, and that's what made him so unhappy about other people. In that particular sentence, there was some figurative language. Foul dust floated. First of all, the double F's there, foul and floated. I would circle those F's and write above it alliteration. The dust floated in the wake of his dreams. That's definitely a metaphor. My family had been a prominent, well-to-do people in the middle western city for 3 generations. The Carraways are something of a clan, and we have a tradition that we've descended from the Dukes of Bucklow, but the actual founder of my line was my grandfather's brother, who came here in 51, not 1951, by the way, sent a substitute to the Civil War and started the wholesale hardware business that my father carries on today. I never saw this great uncle, but I'm supposed to look like him with special reference to a rather hard-boiled painting that hangs in my father's office. And a hard-boiled painting, that would be a metaphor probably, if you can imagine like this big portrait hanging on the wall, very stoic person. That's what I'm imagining there. Hard-boiled makes me think that. I graduated from New Haven in 1915, just a quarter of a century after my father, and a little later I participated in that delayed Teutonic migration known as the Great War. The Great War here is World War One. It's a Great War because there hadn't been a World War II yet. I enjoyed the counter raids so thoroughly that I came back restless. Instead of being the warm center of the world, the Middle West now seemed like a ragged edge of the universe, so I decided to go east and learn the bond business. Everyone I knew was in the bond business, so I supposed it would support one single man. All of my aunts and uncles talked it over as if they were choosing a prep school for me, and finally said, "Why, yes," with very grave, hesitant faces. Father agreed to financing me for a year, and after various delays, I came east permanently, I thought, in the spring of 22. The practical thing was to find rooms in the city, but it was a warm season, and I just left a country of wide lawns and friendly trees. So when a young man at the office suggested we take a house together in a commuting town, it sounded like a great idea. So commuting town would be like a bedroom community. It's like Bennington. Bennington is a commuting town to Salina. It's a smaller town outside of a bigger town. He found a house, a weather-beaten cardboard bungalow at $80 a month, but at the last minute the firm ordered him to Washington, and I went out of the country alone. I had a dog, at least I had him for a few days until he ran away, and an old Dodge and a Finnish woman who made my bed and cooked breakfast and muttered Finnish wisdom to herself over the electric stove. It was lonely for a day or so until one morning some man, more recently arrived than I, stopped on the road. "How do you get to West Egg Village?" he asked helplessly. I told him, and as I walked on I was lonely no longer. I was a guide, a pathfinder, an original settler. So Nick had just been in East Egg, is where he is, for a short amount of time, but because he had a purpose, he felt like he belonged then. And something that I would note, first of all, I would note that it gave him a purpose, and so he was happy then, but I would also make a note of West Egg. What kind of name is West Egg? And it hasn't mentioned it yet, but Nick lives in East Egg, so anyway, we'll have to think about the symbolism of that. And so with sunshine and great bursts of leaves growing on trees, just as things grow in fast movies, I had that familiar conviction that life was beginning over again with summer. There was so much to read, for one thing, and so much fine health to be pulled down out of the young breath-giving air. I bought a dozen volumes on banking and credit and investment securities, and they stood on my shelf in red and gold like new money from the mint, promising to unfold the shining secrets that only Midas and Morgan and Messenius know. So a couple of things there. Red and gold like new money, like, that's a simile. And then Midas and Morgan and Messenius. Midas, do you know about the Midas touch? That's the guy who touched everything and it turned to gold. And these other guys, J.P. Morgan, he's the big money guy of this time. And actually there's still some banks with his name. So those are allusions there. And I had the high intention of reading many other books besides. I was rather literary in college one year. I wrote a series of very solemn and obvious editorials for the Yale News, and now I was going to bring back all such things into my life and become again the most limited of all specialists, the well-rounded men. Isn't that just an epigram? Life is much more successfully looked at from a single window, after all. That's an interesting thought. Life is better looked at through a single window. So if you only see this one piece of the world, then it looks like you might be an expert, but really you're only seeing one small portion of the world. And I would definitely make a note about that. It was a matter of chance that I should have rented a house on one of the strangest communities in North America. It was on that slender Ritus Island, which extends itself due east of New York, and where there are, among other natural curiosities, two unusual formations of land. 20 miles from the city, a pair of enormous eggs, identical in contour and separated only by Courtesy Bay, jet out from the most domesticated body of salt water in the Western Hemisphere, the great wet barnyard off of the Long Island Sound. They're not perfect ovals like the egg in the Columbus story. They're both crushed flat at the contact end. But their physical resemblance must be a source of perpetual confusion to the gulls that fly overhead. To the wingless, a more arresting phenomenon is their dissimilarity